All right, three, two, one. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a returning guest, a very special guest. He talked with me about his book, Hillary Invents, A Story of Love, Death, and Cover-Up. We have a recorded conversation about that book from September 1st, 2016. His name is Dean Arnold. He has just recently published a book, which I read with great interest, a very fascinating book that he wove together a variety of different narratives, his experiences in Ethiopia, the history of Ethiopia, and also this view of Ethiopia from, I would say, a more Afrocentric perspective. The title of the book is Unknown Empire, The True Story of Mysterious Ethiopia and the Future Arc of Civilization. He's also written another book, Old Money, New South, Spirit of Chattanooga, The Cherokee Princes, Mixed Marriages and Murders, True Unknown Story Behind the Trail of Tears. And he's also written a screenplay titled The Wizard and the Lion, that's about the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So he's definitely done some serious writing, but again, tonight we're going to talk about his book, Unknown Empire, The True Story of Mysterious Ethiopia and the Future Arc of Civilization. Dean, are you there?
I am right here.
Awesome. Thanks for agreeing to the interview. So,
yeah, awesome.
Cool. So people who don't, your books are also available at your website, deanarnold.org, and Amazon as well. But for people who may not know you, can you talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in the subject of mysterious Ethiopia?
Sure. First of all, I kept Ethiopia out of the lead title because nobody really cares about Ethiopia, let's be honest. The book is about where the future is going. The book is about the fact that birth rates are declining in the West way below replacement level. But Africa, particularly Asia as well, but they're dying. But Africa is having 5 children per woman. Replacement rate is 2.1. The West is having 1.5. And so in 50 to 100 years, world population and therefore political and economic power is shifting to the East and to Africa. And Christianity will, in large part possibly be happening or contained and preserved in Ethiopia, which is a 2,000-year Christian country. So the book is really about the future shift of civilization, and I feel like I'm kind of writing about the New World in 1650. Back then it was all about, England and Shakespeare and, Queen Elizabeth and the Spanish Armada, and that was all the big news, but it wouldn't take long before the real action was in the New World. And so that's what my book is about. So I try to soundbite it that way, William, because that's really, it's a big deal. And I spent 2 or 3 years of my life working on this, not because I was just interested in an exotic, little country over in Africa, and, that's kind of cool and that's all neat and everything. But I wrote this because it's really important.
Gotcha. And when did your relationship with Ethiopia begin?
Okay, this book started, the seeds of it started in late 90s when I stumbled across a VHS video, National Geographic video, about the idea of the Ark of the Covenant being in Ethiopia, which, of course, I'd never heard of that. I was shocked to hear it. National Geographic was sympathetic toward the idea, and so I watched that with great interest. Whether the Ark is there or not that's an interesting question, and I use that as a device for reader interest throughout my book. And if you really want to know the answer to that, I think I provide the answer to that. But that's not really what captured my interest. What captured my interest is that there was an ancient Christian country in sub-Saharan Africa. Nobody told me. I didn't know. What? I became interested in Ethiopia. I began looking into it and its history. And then in my personal Christian journey, my dad was a kind of a fundamentalist Calvinistic pastor, great guy. But when I became around 35 or 40, I actually became Eastern Orthodox. That's a whole other story, not for today. But the Eastern Orthodox are very kindred and close in worship and beliefs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And so that gave me a stronger interest in Ethiopia. So I started taking a look at it. But what really got me to start seriously studying Ethiopia was my pro-life background. I've been a pro-family, pro-life activist most of my life. and that's where I cut my writing teeth, was writing news releases and newsletters and stuff for activist publications and that kind of stuff. And so I've followed birth rates very carefully. One of the books that really moved me was Pat Buchanan's book, The Death of the West, that came out in 2002, where he uses only United Nations statistics to prove beyond a doubt that the West is dying and the future is in other places on the planet. And I was kind of bowled over by that. And I started praying about where is the future of Christianity going to be, because I'm interested in historic Christian nations with my kind of Eastern Orthodox bent. I was looking at places like Greece, which is an ancient Christian stronghold. Well, Greece has a birth rate of 1.3. Greece is not going to exist in 100 years.
Wow.
Of course, all the Protestant nations have a birth rate about the same in Europe. And so that's dying. I looked at Russia, which is slightly more hopeful, but Russia is in kind of bad shape too. They were at 1.1 or 1.2 at the fall of communism. They've raised it up to about 1.7, 1.8. Putin has financial rewards for families, large families, and they have a holiday now called Make a Baby Day, where you get to go off work, take a day off work and go make a baby. But they're trying very hard to get their demographics up. And I was looking at other countries. I spent a summer in South Korea, which is a very, very strong Protestant country. So I looked at Korea. Korea's in terrible shape. They're at 0.096, the lowest birth rate in the world. And so that's devastating. They're right there with Japan. And so as I did that little survey, this was 10, 12 years ago, the only country that really met the two criteria of being a historic Christian nation and having a high birth rate was Ethiopia. And so I kind of targeted them on the map. I finally got my first chance to go there about 3 years ago, and I've taken 3 trips there. I've met a lot of high-ranking people, and was able to do a lot of research and interviewing, and was able to write my book.
And why don't you talk about what makes Ethiopia unique among Christian nations in its history? It really does have a unique church history.
Yeah. We can go way, way back, and I'll do that in a minute. But
Okay.
Let's just start with Christian history. The Christian history starts with something that Christians would be familiar with. In Acts chapter 8, the Apostle Philip baptized the Ethiopian eunuch, who went back and brought the gospel to the Ethiopian people, sort of representing the first Gentile nation in a way. And that movement grew at a grassroots level, but by the early 300s, it had grown to the point where the Ethiopian emperor, Azena, converted to Christianity. And this is before Rome became Christian under Constantine. And people, there's some arguments back and forth about countries that Armenia and some others that might be the first Christian nation. But I think I prove in the book that Ethiopia is the first Christian nation and definitely the first Christian empire. And so it began to obviously grow as a Christian nation at that point. And then they spent 1,000 years, I guess 1,500 now, fighting Muslims on every side of their borders. And then in the late 1890s, they were invaded by Italy, which sought to convert the Orthodox Christian barbarians into Catholics. And Italy formed the largest European army ever to appear on African soil. And so Ethiopia rounded up their minions, and they had a great big battle at a place called Agwa in northern Ethiopia. And the Italians were absolutely routed. And it was, back then it was the shot heard around the world. Everybody couldn't believe it. And the emperor who put that all together for Ethiopia was named Menelik. And after that great battle, there was people all over the West who named their child Menelik, and Menelik and his wife, the Queen, appeared on the Time magazine covers of their day, and it was quite a thing. Ethiopia has thus become the only African nation to never be colonized, and they claim that they've never been successfully invaded ever. The book spends quite a bit of time, a few chapters, recounting that whole saga, that whole battle. And then about 40 years later, there was a guy in Italy who never forgot the humiliating defeat that Italy received by the Ethiopians. And so he decided to go back and invade them and win that battle back. His name was Mussolini, Benito Mussolini. And so the fascists in 1935 invaded, committed horrible war crimes, chemical gassings, mustard gas, killed Ethiopians by the hundreds of thousands. But the Ethiopians outlasted Mussolini, allied themselves with the Allied powers, and were able to successfully see Mussolini leave Ethiopia. That was under Emperor Haile Selassie, which might be a name that some people are familiar with. So my book has several chapters that talk about that great saga as well. Now, if we want to go a little further back, before Christianity, Ethiopia has about 1,000 years of Jewish heritage, and this is related to them claiming to have the Ark of the Covenant. But if you look in biblical passages, there's no question that, by the 700s or 800s BC, that there's an Ethiopian Jewish presence because the scriptures talk about it. There's an Ethiopian who saves the prophet Jeremiah after he got thrown into a well to die. So that's an Ethiopian character. There is the Queen of Sheba, who has interesting encounter with King Solomon in 1000 BC. Ethiopians claim that through that union, a son was born who was his name was Menelik I. That through that union, he brought several Jewish nobles to Ethiopia, and that kind of began the Ethiopian Jewish tradition. 500 years before that, there was another famous Ethiopian bride. You want to take a guess at that, William? I don't want to put you on the spot with your Bible knowledge, but
remind me. I did read it. So.
Oh, you read the book? You got a little extra heads up. Yeah, so Moses married an Ethiopian woman. And then 500 years before that, Ethiopia claims to they claim that Melchizedek, who is the priest most high, who was the sort of the spiritual father of Abraham, the first Jew, they claim that Menelik was Ethiopian. Did I say Menelik? Melchizedek is Ethiopian. Of course, in Christian theology, Jesus Christ, the great high priest for Christianity, is in the order of Melchizedek. That we no longer have the Aaronic priesthood of the tribe of Levi. We're in the priesthood of Melchizedek. But finally, Ethiopians claim to go really far back because they claim that the Garden of Eden was located in Ethiopia. I actually spent a couple chapters in the book talking about that. It's great fun. I wouldn't fall on the sword for that belief, but I think it's a very interesting, very plausible belief that's worth looking at and worth our attention. And so I spent a lot of time on that as well.
Right, because in the Bible it mentions the Blue and White Nile, right? So I think the Blue Nile starts in Ethiopia. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And
Genesis chapter 2 talks about Ethiopia.
But that's one of the interesting aspects of Ethiopia is they did have a Jewish presence until the Philoshes were lifted out to Israel, right? I don't know if there's any Jews still left in Ethiopia. Do you know?
There's a few thousand left. There was quite a few more, 25, 30, 50, 100 years ago. A lot of them did leave with the movement you're talking about. There's been some movies made about the Ethiopian Jews that escaped from a temporary communist reign in Ethiopia and went back to Israel. So yeah, that's a well-known story.
Right. So I mean, that was kind of like one of the darker elements of Ethiopia is that their kingship finally ended sometime in the 20th century. Correct?
That's correct. A 3,000-year Christian empire, Judeo-Christian empire, I guess you'd say, finally ended with the assassination of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1975. There was a 15-year communist reign, which was bloody, as communist reigns are. About 1 million people were genocided. and then Ethiopia retook their government with a strong Christian influence, and has been one of the leading, I don't know if you call them democracies, but one of the leading semi-democratic governments in Africa since then.
And what, they had, let's see, what distinguishes Ethiopian Christianity itself? What makes it different? The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, right?
Yeah, well, so let's talk about Christianity. The largest Christian expression in the world is Roman Catholicism, which is about 1 billion. The second largest is Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, etc., which is about 400 million Christians. It's hard to count Protestants because, they're so divided that you can't pick one group. So we'll just leave them aside for this exercise we're doing here.
Gotcha.
But then the next group after that is a group sometimes they're called Oriental Orthodox, sometimes they're called Syrian Orthodox, sometimes they're just known as Copts, C-O-P-T-S. Copts are pretty much Egyptian only, but the wider group is called Oriental Orthodox, and that would be Egyptian Copts, Ethiopian Christians. Southern India has a Oriental Orthodox movement. Armenia, the whole country of Armenia, and then there's pockets in Syria and some other places, and that's called the ancient Oriental Orthodox Christians. Of those, Ethiopian Christians make up about 80% of all the Oriental Orthodox. So Ethiopia is the 800-pound gorilla in that whole thing.
Gotcha. And the population right now is pretty sizable. It's like 110 million, right, at the 20th century, at the beginning of the 20th.
Second largest country in Africa, and of course Africa is like 1.4 billion right now. It's going to double in a couple of decades, and really, what I talk about a lot of things in the book, a lot of interesting things that we've already named. But what I'm really trying to communicate to my readers is that the future is going to be in Africa. Because of birth rates. Ethiopia is the cultural and spiritual leader of Africa because of its ancient Christian and Jewish heritage. It's had a written script for thousands of years, which the other African nations generally haven't. The African Union is permanently located in Addis Ababa, the capital city of Ethiopia, and the West is not going down without a fight. There is a huge frantic effort by the United Nations, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, by other progressives and liberals to bring contraception and population control to Africa to keep them from growing like they're growing. Some people probably think they're doing it, for sustainability reasons or, to help the Africans so they don't grow so fast so they, won't be in poverty. But my book, I think, does a pretty good job of documenting the fact that a good part of that movement is really rooted in darker elements of eugenics, racism, white supremacy, and all those things that, are known to be evils.
Yeah, you had something in Chapter 19, I think it was May 5th, 2009. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Ted Turner, Sir George Soros, and David Rockefeller all at one meeting. It's like the usual suspects. Talking about all this stuff, trying to curtail growth in Ethiopia.
Well, yeah, and to help better dramatize that anecdote you just brought up, William, they got together for a meeting. Those major oligarchs of the West don't get together very often. And they got together to discuss what is the most important problem on the planet. And each of them gave like a 15-minute presentation and kind of gave their issue, their angle of what it was. Well, when it was all done, they all agreed on Bill Gates's presentation, which is the biggest problem on the planet is Africa's overpopulation. So they all agreed together to work together with Bill Gates on the biggest problem in their perception on the planet, which was population growth in Africa. And so Number two, who's the second richest guy? Warren Buffett. He gave $31 billion to the Gates Foundation so they could focus their efforts on this project. So yeah, crazy. But that is in truth what happened.
And what's the position of the Ethiopians against these external, influences, people like Gates and Rockefeller?
Yeah, it's probably like asking an American, "What do you think of Trump?" You're gonna, it depends on who you ask.
Right.
What country, what part of the country in, how religious are they, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that it would run the gamut. I think I would like to think that there's not a lot of card-carrying progressives in Ethiopia. I would think there's mostly just people who are excited about, newfound economic growth and some of the goodies that come with Western involvement. And because of that, they're not really thinking through the fact that abortion and contraception and limiting of families and GMO foods and all these kind of things are all part of the package that comes to them. I hope that my book and other efforts will help enlighten some of those. Now, there's a good, nearly 50% of Ethiopia's Orthodox Christian, and then the rest are Protestants and Catholics. The rest of the 65% Christian, there's 35% Muslim population as well. But anyway, but there is a strong group of devout, solid Orthodox Christians who I think would be in a little bit better position to solidly oppose these kind of Western things. And while, as a Christian, I'm not a big fan of Islam, obviously, but there's actually a silver lining, a positive side to the 35% Muslim population, in the sense that they are very much opposed to Western values, whether it's
right.
birth control, abortion, pornography, all the great Satan stuff. So that does help the Christian majority in Ethiopia stand against those kinds of things. Now, it's a bit of a horse race right now because the Muslims want to gain majority in Ethiopia, and they're more apt to oppose the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the UN and all that stuff and their population control efforts than the actual Christians are. And so, if current trends aren't kind of identified and reversed, Ethiopia could finally become a Muslim majority country in 10, 20, 30 years after being majority Christian for almost 2,000 years.
Right, that would be remarkable. But would you say that there is a sizable Ethiopian diaspora? Because it seems here in the States, there's just larger, more vibrant Ethiopian communities, especially here on the West Coast.
2 to 3 million is the figure that I've come across, but they're mostly located in major cities, so you're going to come across them a lot if you're in Los Angeles. I think the largest diaspora is in D.C. We have a big one 2 hours away here in Atlanta. There's a big one in Toronto. So yeah, there's a lot of Ethiopians in the States.
And you were able to kind of travel around in the kind of backcountry without electricity. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that was on my third trip. I just, for some reason, I had to be in my bonnet. I wanted to find a village in Ethiopia that has never had electricity. I thought that would be easy. It was actually more difficult than I thought. But the reason I wanted to find one is because we have a notion in the West that if you go to an African village or city or town that doesn't have electricity, that's because they're pagans who have not been blessed to have a Protestant Western missionary visit them and bring the gospel and electricity. But Ethiopia completely blows that stereotype because you've got these unplugged villages who've never had power, who've been worshiping Jesus Christ for 2,000 years. So I wanted to go find one, and interview them and talk to them, and I finally did. In the book, we kind of have fun with the journey because the village that we went to, when we got there, just the week before, they had built power lines to the village. And so we walked another hour by foot to find another village that didn't have power lines yet. And when we got there, we found out that they got the power that day, just before we got there. So then we walked another hour that night, in the middle of the night, and we finally found a village that was unplugged. So, yeah.
And what was it like for you to kind of adapt to their coffee ceremonies, their food ways, things like that?
Well, it's a wonderful country, and that's one of the great things about traveling and going to other countries. And Christ his inheritance is the nations, and so it's a cool country. They got this coffee ceremony they've been doing for 1,000 years. You sit around for a couple hours, and you have 3 rounds of coffee, and that's an interesting thing. They've got bright colors. They've got phenomenal iconography and art. The part about Ethiopia that is most interesting to me is that there's churches everywhere, and the churches are packed, and the churches are packed with young people. And that was just something for me that I wasn't quite ready for as a Westerner. We're just used to churches sort of declining, and secularism is so much on the rise, and especially for young people, they're ditching the faith. Well, in Ethiopia, it's the exact opposite. So to see these huge churches everywhere that are teeming and overflowing, I mean, the services, half the people are outside, and they have these processions, parading around the church, thousands at a time. It's truly a remarkable experience. So to me, that's one of the things that really has attracted me.
And they start some of their services at 3 a.m. and go on for hours, right?
Yes. Your average devout Ethiopian is probably in church 15 to 20 hours a week.
Wow. That's not the West, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then what's the importance of the Ark? What is the importance of the Ark, not just in Ethiopia, but also your book?
Yeah, the Ark of the Covenant. For those who don't know, and I think everybody knows because of the darn movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark, the Spielberg movie with Harrison Ford, the Ark of the Covenant is the golden chest that Moses made on the top of Mount Sinai, or after getting the instructions on how to build it on the top of Mount Sinai. And it became the central object of Old Testament worship. That was what was in the Holy of Holies, the most holy inner place that the high priest went into once a year to offer a sacrifice of blood on the Ark of the Covenant. And it was a very dangerous operation. A lot of people know that the high priest had a rope tied around his ankle, that in case he died during the ordeal, they could drag him back out. But that is, so it's sort of known as perhaps the most famous object, in the history of the world, kind of a thing. And it disappears in the Old Testament right after David and Solomon. There's hardly any mention of it made. There's one offhand mention made, and I talk about that in the book to a great detail. You can buy the book and read about it. It's very interesting. And I've got various reasons, biblical and historical, for why or why not the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. And I won't be a spoiler here, so I'll just kind of leave that at that. But the Ethiopians will tell you that they're very proud. Obviously, they have every church has a prototype, a replica of the Ark of the Covenant in their church, in their altar, and it's kind of like it's bigger than George Washington and the cherry tree. I don't know what an American icon is. I don't know what would you say, but it's huge to their whole national identity. They love the Ark of the Covenant, but they're very clear that it's only a relic now, because the other thing you'll see all across Ethiopia are pictures of Christ and his mother Mary, and they believe Mary is the fulfillment of the ark because the Word of God himself, just like the Ten Commandments were in the Ark of the Covenant, Christ was in the womb of Mary, and so the Word of God himself, is the fulfillment of the ark, as is his mother. And so you'll see pictures of Christ and Mary all over Ethiopia. You'll see them in taxi cabs. You'll see those pictures on the side of buses. Every home, everywhere you go, around people's necks. And so they're followers and worshipers of Jesus Christ. And they say that the Ark of the Covenant was an Old Testament relic that has now been fulfilled in Christ. So they don't worship the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, I've got some people in my book who say that one of the reasons they think God in his providence brought the Ark there was so that the Jews wouldn't continue to use it in worship. So they keep it underground and out of sight, and it's no longer to be used. They're very proud of it.
Yeah, it's supposedly in Axum, right? It's supposedly at Axum.
Yeah, Aksum is a city in northern Ethiopia.
But it's like their kind of icon for their whole country is that ark. And some of the people, you said in your book, the ark was like miraculously levitated all the way down to Ethiopia. Was it the 8th century or something like that?
10th century, same time as Solomon. The sacred book of Ethiopia that gives that whole story is called the Kibber Nagast, and so their tradition is that Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had a son. She came back to Ethiopia. He was raised in Ethiopia, but at some point he wanted to go see his daddy, and so he brought a contingent back to Jerusalem, spent 4 or 5 years with his father Solomon, who said that this kid looked a lot like his father David. But after a few years, he said, I want to go back to Ethiopia because I'm going to be the king there, and I want to bring the Old Testament religion to Ethiopia. So Solomon begrudgingly allowed him to do that, and he took with him like 300 nobles, sons of the nobles of Jerusalem. So they had a nobility and a elite class that came back with him, including the son of the high priest. And according to their tradition, at that point, they secretly swapped out the Ark of the Covenant, let's say, and they took the real Ark of the Covenant with them back to Ethiopia. And according to their tradition, the Ark took them across the Red Sea. They were floating like a meter or two above the sea as they went across, and that sort of thing. A lot of sort of Old Testament, like Moses and the Red Sea crossing kind of imagery. Right. In my assessment of the situation, I think it's more likely that the Ark got there in the 4th or 5th century, and so that's where I part ways with some of the Ethiopian tradition. But I adopt most of it.
Another interesting aspect of their religious practice is they adhere to the Book of Enoch as well, which is not as common in other Christian churches.
Right. Well, they believe Ethiopian was Enoch too. And did I reverse that? They believe Enoch was an Ethiopian, right? Yeah, and we wouldn't really have the Book of Enoch if it wasn't for Ethiopia. There was only fragments of it in Europe, and Europe did not really think it existed anymore. And then a 17th century explorer, James Bruce, I think his name is, he went to Ethiopia, discovered the Book of Enoch, and brought it back to Europe. So they have a full copy. It's actually part of the Ethiopian canon of Scripture, so it's in their Bible. It's held as an important and reliable book in other traditional Christian circles, like the Eastern Orthodox. They don't say it's Scripture, but it's actually quoted in the Book of Jude, the Book of Jude in the New Testament. So it's a pretty esteemed book, and we wouldn't have the full thing if it wasn't for Ethiopia.
Gotcha. Interesting. Well, we're at about 40 minutes. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or anything I missed? Anything you want to put in here before we wrap this up?
Just thinking about some of the things you discuss on your channel and that sort of thing, but the oligarchs, who are into the occult and the New Age, there's a lot of that's mixed into my book that I talk about. I talk about the fact that the Gates were, we don't know, donors to the Lucis Trust, and I've got all that documented. They tried to wipe it away from the internet, even from the Wayback Machine Internet Archives, but I took screenshots 10 years ago proving that Bill and Melinda Gates are donors to the Lucis Trust. The Lucis Trust derives from the word Lucifer, and they admit that on their website. And the Lucis Trust is sort of the key group that's involved with the United States Meditation Room, which is kind of the spiritual heart and soul of the United Nations. They've got this room that is kind of a simulation of the Holy of Holies, Israel's Holy of Holies, with this arc-shaped Nordic rock right in the center.
Right, like it's a square box, yeah.
Yeah, so I do some literary stuff with the true Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia and this false Ark of the Covenant in Manhattan at the United Nations, but also tying in the Luciferian stuff, the Gates being donors to this Luciferian organization and that sort of thing. So this thing is pretty dicey, and if you're into the conspiratorial stuff, which I kind of am, and I think some of your shows deal with that sort of stuff, if you want to know more about that, this would be a good book to read.
Yeah, definitely. An excellent book. I highly recommend this book. It's an excellent history book, also first-person account of Ethiopia. Again, the title is Unknown Empire, The True Story of Mysterious Ethiopia and the Future Arc of Civilization by Dean W. Arnold, published December 2019, available at deanarnold.org and amazon.com. Dean Arnold, thanks so much.
Really enjoyed it, William. Thank you.
All right, take care.